G'day everyone, welcome back. This is episode 3 of my preview series of the 1904 Imperial Sunrise campaign coming for Strategic Command American Civil War in the 1.08 patch. This will be released on June 29th, as of the time of this recording at least. Of course, things do change sometimes, so, well, if I've posted something on the forum since, then that's going to be more accurate than anything I say here. So, March 20th, 1904. The Imperial Japanese Army is still somewhere in Korea. We await their approach. Don't know if we await them eagerly or not. Probably not. How I think a lot of Russians in this war would have felt. It was interesting. The Tsar was led to believe at the start of the conflict it'd be a very easy war. A lot of this came from the idea that until this point in history, no European power had ever been defeated by an Asian one. Of course, the Japanese had proven their worth as soldiers in their war against China in 1894. It's very interesting, actually. During certainly the early part of this campaign, but even as late as the siege of Port Arthur, the Japanese literally dusted off their old plans from 10 years earlier, carried out the exact same strategy, like, without changing a thing, and it worked splendidly for them twice. And obviously the Russians thought that, you know, Japanese, they're Asian soldiers, they're not going to be as good as the Europeans. They pay dearly for it. We are not going to make that same mistake. I know, one, that Old Crow's going to give me a good fight very soon. His army's still here somewhere. I don't know if he's actually transported them all to Korea yet, or if he's still reinforcing everyone back in Japan. But probably about turn 6, he's going to hit us like a tidal wave. So what I've got to do at this point really is just build up the army. We do that by purchasing lots and lots of cores. Got to keep in mind other things though. Cavalry you need for spotting. If we're going to do anything other than get ambushed constantly, you're going to need some cavalry. Might want some artillery as well. But you've got to get numbers in the field. The Russians believed they needed 200,000 men in the field to have a good chance of holding back the Japanese. Or at least, that was the opinion of the soldiers who, well, I shouldn't say soldiers, I really should say the generals that didn't just completely disregard the Japanese martial abilities. Now I've noticed OCB's been bombarding these ports. He's actually preventing my torpedo boats, these two, from deploying. He probably thinks he's hindering me by doing that. I consider it something of a favour because I don't really want those torpedo boats out on the map, because if they're out on the map then he can attack them. And right now my navy's not really in any shape for battle. And the longer that he believes that I'm completely crippled, he might just leave me alone, and they'll let me eventually assemble all of my ships into one force. I've got, of course, the group up here. I've also got the Baltic Fleet. They're going to arrive about a year's time. No rush. Well, the voyage is quite long. I think it's 18,000 miles, 29,000 kilometers. That's, well, it's quite literally halfway around the world. Took them 8 months. Even getting from their home base in St. Petersburg just out of the Baltic, that was a trial in itself. They sank, well, one of the ships sank in dry dock. They were applying extra armor in it, but they forgot that when you take the armor off the ship, that there's going to be a hole in the ship. So they took the armor off, the ship sank, they had to refloat it to apply the new armor. If you haven't read the story of the Baltic Fleet, it's the craziest story I've pretty much ever come across in... I've read a lot of military history at this point. I haven't ever read something quite as absurd as the list of nonsense that the Baltic Fleet got up to. It's actually a large part in what inspired me to create this campaign. It's such an absurd story and such a funny story. Not really morbid. Certainly the last part of it where they met the Japanese at Tsushima, which is right here. That bit's morbid, but the 8 months beforehand, it was really just a whole bunch of Russian sailors trying, not very successfully, to keep the fleet together as they sailed all the way around Europe, all the way around Africa. And it's the sort of story you go read for yourself. I don't think I could do it justice just explaining it. It's equal parts hilarious and really speaks to the ability of leaders to keep a navy together where every single factor was going against them. A very large number of those factors self-inflicted, but even so, you know. Anyway, these first couple of turns as the Russians, there's not a lot of action there. There wasn't a lot of action historically. They were sort of just rushing to get as many men as they could across the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which, of course, that goes all the way from Moscow to the Far East. That's something like 10,000 kilometers. It's a long journey. We're really just hoping that the Japanese can't get their act together and get into battle before we're ready for them. Historically, the first battle at the Yalu was April 30th. The Japanese pretty much outflanked the Russian force and sort of forced them to just retreat first to over here and then eventually towards Liaoyang. We await that. Our armies are building up, but we're not going to see any of them for a good 3 months or so. So there's sort of this eerie calm, but as soon as the Japanese attack, Old Crow's going to be ferocious. So anyway, that's turn 3. If you got any questions about the campaign, I'm more than happy to talk about it in the comments. I can't really anticipate what you're going to ask me in these videos, so add to the experience by adding your thoughts. I'm very keen to be able to discuss it with you. Of course, when there's no action on the battlefield, I can't comment too much about what's going to happen other than what I guess Old Crow's planning. He's got his own videos. I definitely encourage you to go and watch them as well. He's told me that his first 3, they're averaging about 20 minutes. I know my one that I recorded, well, you'll see it yesterday from your perspective. It's yesterday for me, but several weeks ago. That was 5 minutes, because I really can't say too much unless I know what you want me to talk about. I mean, I can say how the campaign works, but you'll get as much value from that just reading the strategy guide. I'm not sure if they'll be available to you at the point this video goes out, but I think the campaign in large part speaks for itself. The Russo-Japanese War, as I'm understanding it, it's sort of known enough, or at least the broad strokes were fairly familiar to anyone who's, you know, studied the early 20th century at least. It's sort of, in a way, the opening shot of World War One. There's certainly a lot of aspects of it, the trench warfare, the use of artillery. This was the last war that was dominated by the pre-Dreadnought battleship as opposed to the Dreadnought that sort of, I think HMS Dreadnought actually came into being like months after this war ended. So sort of the closure of an era as well. I guess that's why I put in the Civil War game instead of the World War One game. It sort of straddles that line between the era of the Civil War and the era of World War One, and in many ways it's both. The pre-Dreadnought, well, the pre-Dreadnought itself came of the 1890s, but a lot of the ideas that like created the pre-Dreadnought, that the pre-Dreadnought was built upon, were the same ideas that were the ironclad designs of the later part of the Civil War. And on land too, the weaponry was sort of, it was changing, but the tactics to go along with it hadn't quite changed fully themselves, or the commanders didn't really know what to do with them yet. So you have things like the Battle of Mukden, the Battle of Liaoyang. They were far bigger than the Civil War battle, but they were fought in very similar ways to things like Gettysburg. So yes, that's... I guess that's sort of where this campaign comes from. As I said, ask me in the comments if you want to know anything. That's why I record these videos, is so I can sort of share the game with you. Because of course, being the developer of it, I've got a bit of a unique perspective, but that doesn't have to be a perspective that's just kept to myself. I'd love to share it with you. So, I'm going to end the turn here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again tomorrow. And if you got any questions, let me know.